Hello, my name is Evan, and when I was a child, I used to experience sleep paralysis. For those who don't know, it's that terrible feeling of being awake but unable to move, as if your body is trapped in some sort of temporary paralysis. The first few times it happened, I had no idea what was going on. I felt completely powerless, as if something evil was holding me down in bed. My experiences started around the time I was 8 years old. I clearly remember the first time. I was lying in my bedroom, which was in the attic of our old house in Salem, Massachusetts. I've always found this town a bit scary, with all its history of witchcraft and mysticism, but I never thought it would affect my life in such a direct way. It wasn't just the paralysis that terrified me, but the hallucinations that came with it. During these episodes, I felt my bed shake, as if something or someone was trying to pull me out of it. Sometimes I would hear whispers in a language I couldn't identify, whispers that seemed to come from every corner of the room. It was as if a malevolent presence was enjoying my distress, laughing at my powerlessness. In addition to the whispers, there were horrible visions. I saw shadowy figures in the corner of the room, their eyes shining with an eerie light. Once I saw a tall, hooded figure standing next to my bed, its red eyes fixed on me. Other times, smaller figures, almost like childlike shadows, scurried across the floor, whispering indecipherable things and hiding under my bed. Then came the night that changed everything. I had just turned 12 and was watching TV in the living room. My parents were out, and I was taking the opportunity to watch some movies that I normally wouldn't be allowed to see. That night I chose a random horror movie, nothing too scary, just to pass the time. I fell asleep on the couch, with the TV still on. That's when I had another sleep paralysis experience. The familiar feeling of helplessness washed over me, followed by the trembling of the bed, or in this case, the couch. The whispers started again, but this time they were louder and clearer than ever. When I finally broke free from the paralysis, breathless and sweaty, I was startled by the sound of the TV. To my absolute panic, The Exorcist had just started playing. I had never watched that movie before, but I knew exactly what it was about. The fear of demonic possession had always haunted me, especially because of my sleep paralysis experiences. I frantically tried to turn off the TV, my fingers trembling as I pressed the buttons on the remote control, but the remote didn't work. Desperate, I went to the TV and turned it off manually. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, trying to make sense of how the movie had started playing. I was certain it wasn't the movie I'd been watching before I fell asleep. A few weeks later, I had the worst episode of sleep paralysis of my entire life. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to move, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The whispers started almost immediately, louder and more frenzied than ever. I saw figures emerging from the walls, their faces twisted in expressions of pure malice. One figure in particular stood out. She was a woman with long, tangled hair, and her eyes were two black pits that seemed to suck all the light out of the room. She slowly approached my bed, extending a skeletal hand in my direction. I could feel the weight of her presence, a sense of pure malevolence crushing my chest. To this day, the sleep paralysis experiences haunt me. I've never been able to find a logical explanation for what happened that night with The Exorcist or the figures I saw during my paralysis episodes. But one thing is certain, the fear of the unknown and the feeling of being pursued by something evil continue to linger. Salem, with its sinister history, seems like the perfect setting for these inexplicable events. Perhaps I'll never uncover the full truth, but the sleep paralysis experience and the terrifying coincidence of The Exorcist taught me never to underestimate the power of fear and the human mind. It was a regular Wednesday. My girlfriend, Lauren, and I, Kevin, were looking forward to finally unwinding after a long day of work. Our midweek routine always included a movie, and that night we chose Paranormal Activity 3. We lived in an apartment on the 4th floor of an old building in Chicago. The building was known for its vintage charm, with narrow hallways and tall windows. We didn't have many neighbors, and the nights were usually quiet. As we were watching the movie, the tension was building up. The clock on the wall showed 10:45 p.m. when suddenly the doorbell rang. Lauren and I exchanged a glance. The doorbell never rang at that time. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen just as a precaution and went to the door. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I cautiously opened the door and checked the corridor. Nothing, just the eerie silence of the old building. I went back to the couch, trying to calm down Lauren and myself. "It must have been a mistake," I said, trying to sound confident. She just nodded, visibly nervous. We tried to go back to the movie, but the nervousness was high after what had just happened. Every sound in the film seemed amplified, and every shadow more menacing. We decided to go to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. We lay down, but the distress remained. Every little noise seemed louder than normal, and the fear that the doorbell would ring again kept us awake. A few hours passed, and the silence of the night became unbearable. Around 3 a.m., just as we were finally about to doze off, the doorbell rang again, breaking the silence with an imminence that made our hearts race. We jumped out of bed, and I ran to the door, terror now replacing any attempt at rationality. I looked through the peephole again, and once more, there was no one there. I quickly opened the door, but the corridor was empty and silent. I went back to the bedroom, locking the door with extra care. Lauren was sitting on the bed, hugging her knees, her eyes wide with fear. "This can't be a coincidence, Kevin. Something is wrong," she said, her voice trembling. I tried to keep calm, but the growing terror was undeniable. We sat on the bed in silence, listening to every sound in the building, every creak of the old wood. The night dragged on endlessly. We tried to sleep again, but it was impossible. Every minute felt like an eternity, and the fear that the doorbell would ring once more kept us awake and vigilant. The silence in the apartment became oppressive, and every shadow seemed to hide something threatening. When the sun finally began to rise, we felt immense relief. The daylight brought some comfort, but it didn't erase the terror of the previous night. Lauren was convinced that something supernatural was at play, while I tried in vain to find a rational explanation. To this day, when we hear a doorbell ring, we feel a chill throughout our bodies. We never found out what really happened that Wednesday night. Was it a cruel prank, a technical glitch, or something more sinister? All we know is that the fear we felt was real, and the feeling of being at the mercy of something inexplicable left us with scars that will forever remain. My name is Elisa. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a nurse at a local hospital in Denver, Colorado. I've always loved horror movies, and on that particular night, my husband John and I decided to watch a film recommended by my friend Megan. She had raved about The Conjuring 2, a horror movie based on true events. I was excited, but our 6-year-old son Tommy was scared. John, the skeptic of the house, said that horror movies were nothing but pure fiction. After dinner, John took Tommy to bed. It took a bit longer than usual to get him to sleep as he was visibly agitated by the talk about the movie. John ended up staying with him until he fell asleep. Meanwhile, I prepared the living room, popcorn, blankets, and the soft light of a table lamp. The atmosphere was perfect for a good, scary horror movie. After the movie, John went to check on our son. It was almost 3 a.m. when he finally came back to our room. He lay down next to me, and for a few moments, the house was in absolute silence, broken only by the distant sound of the wind outside. I was just about to fall asleep when we heard a loud noise coming from the closet. It sounded like something had fallen. John, ever the skeptic, grumbled and got up to investigate. He turned on the light, and to our surprise, the picture frame with our wedding photo was on the floor, broken in two. I always kept our things neatly arranged, and this made no sense. The picture frame was on a high shelf at the back of the closet. How could it have fallen and broken like that? The next morning, as we prepared breakfast, the feeling of concern hadn't passed. John tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just an accident, maybe a slight tremor we didn't feel, but his explanation didn't convince me. Later, as I was washing the dishes in the kitchen, I heard a strange sound coming from the living room. When I went to check, I saw our table lamp moving by itself, slowly sliding across the dresser. It was impossible. I called out to John, but by the time he arrived, the lamp had stopped moving. He tried to calm my nerves, saying there must be a logical explanation. During lunch, one of the chairs at the dining table slid across the floor by itself, emitting a creaking noise that echoed through the room. John, now a little less skeptical, tried to push the chair back in place but looked troubled himself. That night, we decided to try for a normal night and avoid talking about what had happened. However, fate had other plans for us. Around 2 a.m., we heard a scream coming from Tommy's room. We rushed in and found him standing on the bed, pointing to the corner of the room, terrified. "There's someone there," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. We looked but saw nothing. We tried to calm him down, telling him it was just a nightmare. But deep down, we knew something very strange was going on. As we returned to our room, I heard the sound of breaking glass again. This time, the picture of the three of us on the bedside table was on the floor. The glass shattered. The feeling of fear and powerlessness was overwhelming. With the dawn, our home returned to a semblance of normality, but the sense that something was wrong never left us. We tried to stick to our routine, but the strange events continued. The feeling of being watched, the unexplained noises, and objects moving on their own became part of our daily lives. One night, as we lay in bed, I felt a presence next to me. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow standing at the foot of the bed. I screamed, and the shadow disappeared. John turned on the light, and we searched the house, but found nothing. We were all scared and exhausted. The following Sunday, we decided to go to Mass. We were all frightened and sought some kind of peace. During the service, we prayed fervently, asking for protection and tranquility for our home. After the service, we approached the pastor and shared with him what had been happening. He listened attentively and then offered a special prayer for us, asking God to bless and protect our home. From that Sunday on, we never experienced anything strange again. The noises ceased, the objects stopped moving on their own, and the feeling of being watched disappeared completely. The experience left us forever marked. I apologize for bothering you with this story, but I felt it was important to share. People should not watch these movies based on true events, as terrible consequences can occur. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.